Hello everyone, and welcome to the Weaponized Ink YouTube channel once again. Joining me today are two creatives who have done quite a bit of work for Werewolf the Savage Age, especially the visceral comics that await you within the product itself. Joining me today is Willis Harrower, artist for the Werewolf the Savage Age comics, and Brandon Steward, writer for the Savage Age comics, as well as for quite a bit of Werewolf the Savage Age itself. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having us.
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Great to hear. So I really love talking to creatives in this industry, especially for the ones who really delve deep into these worlds and try to create just an incredible expression of these worlds, both, in its words as well as its visuals. And thankfully, I'm now talking to two people who delve into both of those aspects, an artist and a writer. So, we have a lot of people in our audience who are interested not only in the industry, but also breaking into the industry. And they love hearing stories about how people have broken into those industries in order to create works within them. So I'm going to ask you both, and I'll start with you, Willis, our artist. What has been your own experiences, not only in your field, but also specifically starting in that field and getting to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, I've been an illustrator for my whole life. It's kind of how I best express myself and escape in general. I'm sure it's the same for all artists, but it's just as you say, world building, that sort of thing. That's kind of what attracted me to art in the first place. Getting to kind of just sit down and, even regardless of your ability to render what's in your imagination, just the process of putting it down on paper, just like with writing, I'm sure Brandon would agree. You start something in your mind much larger than that, and it just kind of snowballs away from you, and it's very addictive. I got into that right away throughout my life, and so it's always been a part of me. So I don't know, really early on, I was like 10 years old with my buddy. We're walking past the shop window, and standing in the window is the Rage CCG from Werewolf the Apocalypse. They had this giant promo poster that was like as tall as I was at the time. I think Brian LeBlanc, the cover art he did for the game was just like this giant werewolf running forward, and that was standing in the window, just giant letters Rage underneath. Grabbed me and my buddy instantly off the street. We didn't know anything about it. We walked right inside and said, "To Rage, please," and then kind of just got absorbed in that kind of art, which wasn't anything that I had really experienced art-wise until then. Before, all my run-ins with art were like Disney cartoons, superheroes, that sort of stuff, but none of the real kind of visceral graphics, illustrations that you got out of like those manuals from the Werewolf the Apocalypse art. What was going on in the world of darkness that I just was waiting to discover. So that kind of sent me down a straight path towards that type of artwork, that type of theme. Werewolf the Apocalypse was everything for my whole life. I co-opted all my friends into playing Rage that I could. I've still got my Rage cards. I've lugged them around for my whole life. It's just a big part of me. And going on from there, I'd kind of, after the years had gone by, established a lot of my own IP. That I was proud of, I felt was strong, and I wanted to pursue and make something, make my own world that I could share. And on that level, I just started building up assets, and eventually hit a point where I just didn't have the energy working my 9 to 5 to actually put them together into something like a product, something that I could really offer. So I kind of took a look at my life, where I was at, realized I was young enough, etc., to make the move. I quit my job, sold my house, moved away to where it was cheap, and just started trying to do the art thing full time, focusing on my IP at first, trying to kind of get my comics going, that sort of thing. And then afterwards, reaching out to different companies from the industries that I had appreciated as I developed myself as an artist. So various board game companies, pen and paper RPGs. I've done some work with that. I've done a CCG last year, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually I ran into the Savage Age stuff, which I didn't even know was happening. Several books have come out by now, and and it just kind of suddenly struck me how people were making, like independent creatives were making exactly what I wanted to be involved with. Chris was Weaponized. You guys were doing exactly what I wanted to do. I started instantly trying to kind of find out more about that company and reach out to Chris, who he was a phenomenal guy to kind of interface with. And after some back and forth, he kind of brought me along into this project. So I don't know. That's kind of been my travels so far in breaking into the art industry, into the RPG art industry.
It sounds like you made like quite the the leap of faith, if you would. Especially the selling your house, moving somewhere cheap, focusing on it full time, and now we have such incredible visuals of the Werewolf the Savage Age comics. And honestly, I gotta say, and these will be flashing on the screen as I'm talking about them, they're incredible, Willis. Well done.
Oh, cheers! Thanks very much.
Yeah. So, Brandon, same sort of question, and I asked it in sort of a roundabout way with Willis, but basically, how did you get to where you are now as a writer?
Well, it was writing was something I had always wanted to do. It's only really in probably the past 5 years that I've gotten to really move ahead with it, but it was something I was always interested in. I love stories. I grew up on comic books, so comic books in particular have always been a medium that's very close to my heart. And it was around 10 years ago that I actually got introduced to tabletop games, and just that whole idea of collaborative storytelling with my friends was something I took to immediately, loved it so much. And I had never actually thought about writing for tabletop games. It was something I just sort of fell into. My other than like some magazine work, the first fiction gig I ever got, I happened to be on one of the World of Darkness Facebook groups, and there's an author, Joe Nassis. He was putting together a short fiction anthology for what they were calling the Year of the Road event. It was centered around travel, and that was my first gig. He gave me a shot. I had essentially no resume as far as fiction to show off, but gave me a shot, so I got to be included in that alongside people that actually knew what they were doing. And I don't know many creators that don't, but I don't want to speak for everybody. I feel like we all have imposter syndrome to some degree or another, and I definitely did. And I remember when it went live, and I mean, as small of a thing as it is, it was a big deal to me because I saw that it was available for sale. I'm like, oh, this is real now. Pinocchio's possibly a real boy. Well, this is neat. So from there, I really just started keeping my ear to the ground and looking to see, well, is anyone else looking for stuff? Could I do this again? And I just happened to see Chris mentioning, this would have been back in probably mid 2020. He was talking about what would become the third volume of Savage Age, Tools of Extinction. And I just messaged him out of nowhere and said, hi, you don't know me and I've only had one gig, but can I write for you? And he said, well, send me some samples. Show me what you can do. I sent him some stuff, and funny enough, before we went on air, we were joking about how Chris has always openly said, he's not a big fan of the were-spiders, the Anansi. And not knowing this, I sent him a piece of short fiction centered entirely around them. And according to him, the fact that he didn't utterly hate it was reason enough to give me a shot. So
there you go.
But that was my first proper game book tabletop gig, was Tools of Extinction, and that just kind of opened the door to subsequent projects, both in a writing and an editing capacity. And since then, I've gotten to participate in around half a dozen different books for Savage Age, along with the comics that we're doing now, which I'm so excited about, because that was something, going back to being a little kid, I always wanted to be able to contribute to comics as a medium in some way. So, and it was something when I first came on board, I asked him about if that was something Weaponized Inc. was looking at, and at the time it wasn't on the radar. And then here in the last year or so, he mentioned it again, so I just kind of popped up like, hey, remember, I like comics. Can I help? So, but jokes aside, I'm really excited to be involved in these and getting to see, Willis's awesome art create something that's frankly consistently better than anything I have in my head.
Well, honestly, let's kind of get into that, because that's kind of the big reason why we're here, is the Werewolf, the Savage Age comics. Both of you are working on these comics, and so I'd love to ask, what was the process like working on them? Like, what were some of the ideas thrown around? What was it like working with each other, working with Chris? Like, just geek out at me about working on these comics, because I'm geeking out about them right here.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, when I first approached Chris with interest in his Savage Age, he did something that I've encountered a few times with other kind of project leads. I think it's a really strong move in general whenever you see it. But what he did right away was try and identify what I was passionate about with regards to the work. And he kind of just honed in on what would work for that in the Savage Age, what could work with what I would do best. In those conversations, I'm passionate about sequential art, just like comic book art. I like telling as much of a story as I can in one picture, and initially that used to be just kind of like loading a picture up with details, but over time it kind of felt more enjoyable to flow pictures together on one page. Anyway, so that's kind of how that began, and he was all over it. And it was just me and Chris on the first one, and yeah, he did the writing, he pitched the concept, and then we started kind of like throwing sketches together and talking about them. It's so refreshing for me. I'm just an illustrator like my whole life, so like I've got my own IP. I've made my own comics and stuff too, but I'm in no way a writer. So just to be able to actually collaborate with that kind of talent it's so refreshing to have that kind of that end held up without me having to kind of hold it up at all myself. It makes the art a lot stronger. Working with Brandon and Chris, we get to kind of boil down the assets that I throw down for visuals, and they can kind of lead and guide what works and what doesn't, flow and everything. It's all a real pleasure just kind of working collaboratively on these pages with them.
It's been a really cool process, and because I had no experience in this going in, and I think the first scripts I sent in, not knowing, not having found the rhythm yet, I think I went into a ton of detail. Here's what I want in this panel, here's how I see this panel, here's how I see this. And to his credit, Willis made something amazing, but as we've done these, I've realized, and this is something I've heard from comic creators like Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, which is one of the most important things for a comic writer, is learn when to shut up. And I've very quickly figured out that Willis's panel layouts and the way he chooses to pace the story and bring it to life is going to be so much cooler than what I'm going to come up with on my own. So I'd like to think I'm getting better at just giving us what we need and then letting him do his thing, because you've seen the art, you know what he can do. And so I love that I get to contribute in some capacity to provide that framework and let him do his thing. It's funny, every time we just got some of the line work done for the one we're working on, and I go through the same mental journey every time where I get the line work and I'm like, I almost wish we could just put this out in black and white, because when a comic gets colored, some of that line work is lost to some extent. I was like, I hate that any of this would go away because he's got such cool stuff, but then he colors it and I'm like, oh well, this is amazing. And no matter how many times it's happened, I do this every single time. It's like, oh, do we have to color it? I'm so glad we colored it, and I fully expect to keep doing this every single time because I am ridiculous.
That, in my experience, is a common aspect of like artistic collaboration. There are a lot of times where I'm working with someone and I'm I like ask like, are you sure this is gonna work? Like, maybe we should try it like this. And then after I'm like, I should have trusted you from the beginning. That's phenomenal. This is great. And it's really nice just everyone putting in like their own aspects of like, their visions, and then, working together to like put out like what is the completed product. As you guys are saying, an artist working with a writer, you can create such amazing things like these Savage Age comic pages. So speaking of artistic collaboration, can you guys tell me a little bit more about what your work process was like working with each other on these comics?
Yeah, so generally they've kind of all flown about the same way. Brandon and Chris, they kind of they develop a concept and kind of pitch that early, and from there I start sketching stuff out, just doodles, stickmen, stuff like that, just to kind of come up with a layout that might start working, that is different from the other layouts we've used on the other pages, and then just kind of see what kind of rolls down in the actual writing for the actual pacing, how many panels are needed, that sort of thing. So it's kind of how it starts. I'm not sure what Brandon's writing end of it is like, but that's kind of how it rolls. I get a little bit, and then I go a little bit, and then I wait, and then we kind of lockstep like that.
In addition to looking at it from the perspective of, what would I like to see Willis draw, or what do I think makes for a cool story, it's what aspect of our setting can we highlight with these comics that'll make people want to go, ooh, I like that. Maybe I want to get the book that has that in it. Like, for example, I believe the first strip that we collaborated on highlighted our take on the Umbra, which will be in a forthcoming book. And then we did one that highlights one of our legendary fetishes, which is a thing we came up with for Savage Age, which is found in Tools of Extinction. So I try to have them doubled not only as an ad for Savage Age itself, but to point people towards specific things about the line that I think are interesting, that might make someone who's only seen the comics go, well, I'd like that in a game. What book can I go to get that? Because that sounds neat.
It's funny you mentioned, like the Savage Age setting itself, because it's full of a lot of incredibly amazing like ideas and concepts. You talk about the legendary fetish. So what are some thoughts that you two have about the Savage Age setting? Like, working on it, what are some things that like stand out, or what are some things that really like interest you about Werewolf the Savage Age?
I got into Werewolf the Apocalypse really early, and the thing that I couldn't help but really enjoy about the IP was the other Fera. They're kind of always offered as a curiosity, and the werewolves are the meat and potatoes kind of. When you first encounter the IP, werewolves as main characters is really novel in and of itself, but as you kind of slog through the IP, it's like 99% werewolves, and they kept those other Fera at the time that I got into it anyways as like really fringe ideas. And so a lot of that kind of curtained behind the War of Rage and stuff, all the stuff that kind of happened before anything you could even pick up from the White Wolf line for Werewolf the Apocalypse at the time, as far as I was aware anyways. So yeah, the Savage Age setting in and of itself is just so steeped in intrigue already from decades of the official IP, that I think anyone who's a fan of the Werewolf the Apocalypse IP can't help but have fantasies about what it was like for the Savage Age stuff.
One of the things that really drew me to it was just the uniqueness of a prehistoric Pleistocene setting, because there are so many games that do really cool things with modern settings, or certainly high fantasy medieval settings. There's not so much saturation for a prehistoric game, so that raised the initial question with me of, well, what does a prehistoric game look like? What can we do with that? And to me it stands out, and it's different. And within that, one of the things we always said when we were developing the books was, we want you to be able to tell that fireside, survival story where they're huddling up and they don't know what's out in the dark, and every meal is, a dangerous hunt that you have to endure. But we also want you to be able to bring your favorite heavy metal album cover to life. And that's been one of the really fun things, is making this setting where you can have these uniquely grounded stories in a, just very brutal time period, but you can also go over the top and have what are functionally, these terrifying god beasts making one of the world's first wars on each other. So there's a lot of creative freedom there that really draws me to the project.
Love that. So, you mentioned like you want that feeling of like a fireside tale, but also like your favorite heavy metal album cover, and that leads into my next question. What are some of your guys' like outside inspirations in your work, not only with Werewolf the Savage Age, but in your work in general? Like, what are some like people or like pieces of media that you draw upon in a lot of your work?
Yeah, for me, it's just somewhat short list. When I ran into the Rage cards back when I was like 10 years old, I kind of obsessed about those artists for the rest of my life. I even kind of, once I got rolling with my own skills, did my best to isolate myself from influence, because I really wanted my own unique art style. It was a really arrogant, foolish way of developing as an artist, but I was young, whatever. And so I actually don't have a lot of artistic influences beyond like Richard Kane Ferguson and Ron Spencer and Brian LeBlanc from the White Wolf days, those CCG artists, the artists in those books. That's who I've kind of worshipped my whole life. Yeah. Beyond that, I love horror art in general. Anything horror related over any other kind of glance at a material, I'll take a horror side of it anytime. I like horror music, horror movies, horror comics, illustrations, everything. That's what resonates the most with me. The actual like attempt to make someone feel uncomfortable or scared or terrorized or that sort of thing is good entertainment.
So I'm gonna take a guess here. Your favorite holiday is Halloween?
I like the fall. I like the motif. I don't like the Halloweenies. I'm one of those guys, turns off all the lights, won't answer my door, waits for the hours to tick by. Yeah, oh yeah.
Halloween is my favorite holiday. So the fact that you're like, I love horror art, I want Halloween to be over as fast as possible, is very fascinating to me.
Yeah, we have a saying around here: a closed door is a happy door, and a locked door is even better. So yeah, Halloween is it's madness. Everyone wants you to open your front door. Crazy.
Fair enough. Brandon, what about you? What are some of your inspirations?
I've been a huge Neil Gaiman fan my whole life. He was one of the first authors that I like knew the name of enough to like seek out subsequent work from him. But like a lot of my early influences in storytelling come from the comic book medium, whether it's Larry Hama or Grant Morrison, folks like that. But I'm a big fan of horror movies, especially like old Hammer horror or old Universal horror. I've always enjoyed that, or especially any of the stuff where like Tom Savini got to really frolic with the special effects and go over the top with the gore or the transformations, which I think is very Werewolf in spirit. But also, and this is going to sound weird because I know it's not necessarily regarded as hot literature, but I'm a big pro wrestling fan, and one of the things I appreciate about that is when it's done well, it's a masterclass in getting people to suspend their disbelief and invest in something, even if that something is, very silly and over the top. It may, just like with any fiction, you suspend disbelief based on what you're watching, and if it does its job, for however long you're partaking of that thing, you're in the zone. You're, this is real, this is something you care about, and you're invested. And that's honestly one of the things that drew me to not only World of Darkness, but Chris's world building, and this is true in Savage Age and in Hammer and Stake. He does such a great job, and the whole team does, of making these settings that they feel real, they feel lived in, they feel organic, like you could get into what's going on here, but it also gets the ideas flowing for other stuff that, you could do, and that's ideally what a game book should do, I think.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you both. Audience, if you're interested in seeing some of their work, especially with the Werewolf the Savage Age comics, be sure to check the link in the description to check out the Weaponized Ink store. You can also learn more about the people that work with Weaponized Ink through our YouTube channel. We love doing interviews with TTRPG creatives. Be sure to subscribe as well as like this video, and if you want more people to learn about what we're doing, be sure to tell them about what we're doing here. Word of mouth is, of course, the best form of advertising. And speaking of the best form of advertising, any plugs that you guys want to throw in before we head off?
Yeah, you can check out my Instagram, Willis Harrower at Instagram.com. And I've got a webcomic on Webtoons called The Neverbound, one word.
I can find me on Facebook, Brandon Steward, but on my other social media, whether it's Mastodon, Threads, or Blue Sky, I'm Brandon M. Steward, and in addition to pictures of my adorable cats, I very often will give previews of what we're working on at Weaponized Ink, what's coming down the pipeline, a couple of things to look forward to. We've got the second part of the Player's Guide on the way, and I'm currently working on another what we're calling an epic jump start. It's a book of plot threads and hooks and characters that you can use to get an adventure going. Tentatively going to be called Rise of the Nightmare Gods, so really excited about that. And also, just on a personal note, I actually got to help co-write my first novel alongside Joe Nassis. It is Hellstalkers Volume 3, Dark Knight in Caracas, and it will be available later this year. G.I. Joe by way of Doom. I basically got to help write an action movie that I always, like an 80s, 90s action movie that I always wanted to see. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, be sure to keep an eye out for that.
That does sound awesome. Well, Willis, Brandon, thank you for joining us. And audience, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.